Well, I helped solve some of the biggest cases of the end of the 20th century and early into the 21st century, except this one that really means the most to me. I mean, they all were important to me, don't get me wrong. But this is the one victim, Joe, that I knew. I knew personally. I hung out with him in bars and we parties together, and he was at my house. And and through his brother, we were in the wedding together, as groomsmen, and it was just so difficult, certainly psychologically, but it really taught me, and I'm sure Larry and Ray, you can somehow relate to this. But it's one thing looking at these cases coldly and objectively, and that's not a bad thing. You need people to do that, and not be, tainted at all with any sort of over level of emotionality. But for the first time in my life, I mean, I knew, my friend Bob Yezi was killed in the Ben Salem Police Department. That's coming up on almost 50 years, hard to believe. But and he was a friend. But all the cases I've worked, basically, I didn't know the victims, and this was the one case I did, and by no means was I in charge of it. But the one extra thing I did, this was the early days of DNA, and there was a baseball cap, as I said, left behind at the scene. So the Philly PD wanted it checked for DNA, but at that time it was only the FBI lab doing it, and the FBI lab was only taking cases in which they'd have evidence from a crime scene, but they would only take cases in which it could be matched up with a suspect,
With known suspect.
a swab, whatever, and
Yeah.
a known suspect. And we didn't have that in this case. But I still wanted to know, as the Philly PD, was there DNA on this hat? I had to call the unit chief and actually got kind of in an argument with her. I forget her name after all these years. But I said, look, and then finally I backed down. Look, I didn't mean to get upset. This is a personal friend of mine. All I want you to do is put this on the front of the list so we can tell the Philly PD if this is worth pursuing from a DNA perspective. Those results came back, and I'm not going to get any details about that. But let's just say the Philly PD is back on this case. They are going over all the information from back then, and they're looking at a bunch of new stuff, and I'm helping them with that. And that's starting really with this podcast tonight, Crime Stoppers over this next weekend, all around the January 1998 28-year anniversary, which is actually tomorrow as we record this. By the way, that was a Wednesday. For what it's worth, anyone out there who may have any memories of that day and this person, and actually tomorrow is the 21st, it'll be another Wednesday, 28 years later. And we're hoping now we're finally going to be able to get something together with this $25,000 reward. And you guys talked about someone in prison. No one here on this podcast can make a deal, but anybody with any street savvy out there knows you're in prison, you're serving time, you have information about a homicide. Guess what? You can work yourself out a deal with the DA's office, whomever, to get the right person
I'll tell you, Jim,
behind bars for this case. Go ahead, Larry.
Jim, I feel for you because normally when you deal with that type of a crime, you're level removed, and you weren't. You had the scab ripped right off of you, and so you didn't have the benefit of that. So in terms of having intestinal fortitude and keeping your wits about you, I'm sure you did it, but I'm sure it was very challenging because, you're the ultimate professional, and so naturally you have to model that from a leadership standpoint.